following is not affiliated with, endorsed by, or sponsored by Wylie High School or the Wylie Independent School District. It is the independent expression of its author. Welcome, everyone, to the Season 5 premiere of Wylie Football Weekly, the only podcast dedicated to your Wylie Pirates varsity football team. I am your host, the one and only Wylie superfan Pappy, and as a reminder, or a first-time announcement if you're new to the show, Wylie Football Weekly is a proud sponsor of the Wylie Pirate Pace Setters, Pirate Cheer, That Wylie Band, and the varsity football team. As I mentioned on our previous bonus episode of the last season, we now have a YouTube channel at Wylie Football Weekly on YouTube, or just go to our website, wyliefootballweekly.com. That, if you click that page, that will take you directly to our YouTube channel. All of our podcasts are now also available there. They're still available anywhere you get podcasts, like Apple, Amazon, Spotify, you name it, we're on it. And now, finally, we're on YouTube with our own channel where we will not only have the podcasts there, but we will also have video content. Now, if you're new to the show, welcome. This is a show for Wylie Pirate football fans, whether you're a parent or you're just a fan. Welcome. I mean, this is your place to kind of listen and get commentary. And let me talk more about what this show is and is not. And then we'll also talk about how this show came to be. We'll go through an upcoming schedule for the show. And then what we will do is we will talk about uh, the Wylie Pirates this decade, aka the Coach Carter era. And then we will pose and start discussing the question of the season. And what the question of the season means is the question that you should kind of keep in the back of your mind as we go through this season, as you're watching the games. What is the answer to that question? So we will unveil that question, and then periodically through the season, we will come back to that question and give an answer as of that date. Now, what this show is a one-stop shop for your very basic information about Wylie Pirate varsity football. And what I mean by that is tickets, how to get them, where to watch the Pirates on TV or streaming outlets or to listen to them, and also our analysis and commentary, which is really what keeps people coming back year after year. Now, what it's not. Well, it's going to be very clear. You hear it in the intro of the show, but I want to emphasize again that Wylie Football Weekly is not officially tied to the football program, is not tied to the school, not tied to the school district. As we'll keep discussing as we move on in this episode, I'm just a fan. Maybe a super fan, as I say at the top, but just a fan. Right? What this show is like every NFL team or any other professional sports team, you have fans that are super fans and create their own podcasts to talk about the team and give analysis. Well, nobody does that in high school football. You'll hear high school football podcasts that cover an entire region or an entire state, but you don't just hear super fans of one program that are doing their own show. I think, honestly, not to really pat myself too hard on the back, but I think I was one of the pioneers of this here in the state of Texas when I started this show in 2022. And it's grown. There's a few more, including the Wylie East Football Raider Review which hosted by Kevin Andrews, which was inspired by our very show, right? So, and he's a Wiley East super fan, and he does the similar concept, but for the Wiley East Raiders, which I think is really cool, really cool. There really should be more of these throughout the state, um, but it takes a lot of time and effort. And also, I do this for really no money. I make no money. I think our total revenue all time is less than $3, and that's from some sales of our Wiley Football Weekly t-shirts. And that's against our expenses, which are a lot more than $3. So I run this show at a loss because it really is a labor of love. I love watching the Wylie Pirate football program. I love following them. I love covering them. I love talking with all of you and interacting with all of you. And ever since I started the show, I've gained even a deeper appreciation for everybody that's involved in the program. Before I go further, I did mention a shirt. We have a Zazzle store where you can purchase the official Wiley Football Weekly shirt. I would love it if you would check it out, and if you're interested, buy it. Again, not because I want the money. I don't even get $1 for every shirt that's sold, but I'd love for people to wear it, and especially wear it to games, and let people know that you're a fan of this show, and that if they want more coverage of the Wiley Pirate football program, that they can listen to Wiley Football Weekly. Because the reality is, especially if you're new to Wiley, you're new to Wiley football, you'll find no one's really providing that coverage. Wiley News, they do cover the games, but they don't provide any sort of analysis, and they don't really provide. A few years ago, they provided a lot more sort of preview materials during the off season, and they've really skimmed that down. And then expecting the Dallas Morning News to talk about Wiley football, that's just a pipe dream. And it gets worse and worse every year. I mean, they really have gotten to the point where they very much ignore the program. So you want Wiley Pirate football coverage, you get it here, Wiley Football Weekly. Let me talk about how this show came to be for those of you that are new. I moved to Wiley. My wife and I moved to Wiley in 2009, and I moved there to work at a law firm in Dallas. I'm a lawyer by trade, and that was the first time that we had lived in the state of Texas. And one of the things that I noticed was that it was funny because I'd get a lot of crap from people at work. Why did you live? Why did you go move in Wiley? Why would you buy a house in Wiley? That makes no sense. Why? I mean, Wiley, their house prices are never going to appreciate because you can always get new construction if you just keep going 5 miles down the road. For a long time that was true, but then we saw with COVID times things changed, and I got to shove it in their face. But the thing is the way that people in Dallas talked about Wiley really put like a chip on my shoulder, where I was really defensive about living in Wiley while under this kind of constant scrutiny. And at the same time, after sort of a year of living in Wiley, I kind of discovered the football team and started going to games and really getting into it. And I fell in love with the team. Absolutely fell in love with the team, fell in love with the school, fell in love with the program itself. And I felt like this kind of chip on my shoulder evolved into a love for all that is Wiley. And part of that is expressed through the Wiley Pirate football program. I became a super fan. I've had years where I never missed a game attending, and became, I think, one of the foremost kind of experts on pirate football outside of the coaching staff and outside of the players. And when we got into the 2020s, I started having this inkling like, God, I'd love to do a podcast. I'd love to talk. Because before the podcast, my conversations about Wiley football or with myself in the shower. I'd have these shower thoughts and I just say it in the shower. And it just felt like, God, I'd love to express this. And, there was a time where I thought, okay, 2020, I'll launch it. And then didn't get to it. And then I thought about that in 2021. And then same thing, maybe next year. Finally, 2022 came around and I said, let's launch this and let's go. And I did it, put it out there. And here we are 5 seasons later, and we are now, I mean, well, actually, we're in the 5th season, going strong, and it's become a thing that's pretty well known. If you follow the football program, you follow the football team, you know about this podcast, this show. I will point out, just for the record, for any of you new listeners, that same year that I started the show, I did move. I moved away, moved out of Wylie. Did not move, and not because I don't love the city or love the school or any of that stuff. It was the other sort of personal and family reasons that I moved. But the show continues, and I've made many trips back, and I'm that weird person. I guess I'm a bit of an eccentric, that I have this podcast covering this high school football program that I absolutely love to death, despite the fact that I live hundreds and hundreds of miles away now. And thankfully, because of modern technology and things that the football program does, and other schools do, it's a lot easier to do this than if I had started this podcast 10 years ago. Like, if I had moved in 2016, and I had a podcast, I don't think I would have been able to kind of keep it up and give the same coverage that I do. So that's kind of how it came to be. I also want to point out before I move on that a lot of my Wiley life and Wiley community is tied to football. That's, most of the people I personally know have come through meeting people at games, especially the Patterson family. That is my Wiley family. Steve Patterson, if any of you know him, and his daughters, who are my favorite Wiley ISD teachers, Miss Priscilla Patterson Justiano and Miss Allison Bryant. Actually, they're neither they're neither of them are teachers anymore. They're both going to be now both APs starting here in this school season. Which, if you go back to our 2023 season, we said that within 5 years they would become APs, and now both will be APs before we even get to the expiration of that 5 year period. But Wiley football really solidified my connection to the community and my love for Wiley, and I repay that with this show. So let's talk about upcoming schedule for the show. So I should mention, for any of you that's new, our typical shows during the season are, you're going to hear a show. It's going to be put on our YouTube channel on Monday night, and it's going to be posted on our Facebook page on Tuesday. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, completely free, and that way you will get the episodes as soon as they drop. But a typical episode is going to have 2 parts. First half, we're going to recap the game from the previous week, right? The game that was played the last Friday or Thursday. And then the second half, we're going to preview the upcoming game. Really. And that's really the show. It's really a show. Now, we'll talk about some other episodes that we do have before the season starts, or intermixed with that, but that is basically the show. Next week, the week of August 10th, we'll probably just have a very brief episode, remind you again about upcoming scrimmages, because next week we already have our first scrimmage. This is a year that we have 2 scrimmages. Starting practice later, but you get 2 scrimmages, and I think that was a very good decision from the Pirate coaching staff to do. So we will talk about that very briefly. Scrimmages are, a different kind of beast altogether, but we can talk about the opponent and kind of what to look for. And we'll also discuss your feedback. If you provide any feedback, whether it be on the YouTube channel or in the email address that's provided in the show notes, or the Facebook page, or messaging me on Facebook Messenger, we can talk about that next week. Then the week of August 17th, that will be our big season preview episode. And what that means is we'll go through the entire schedule. We will talk about each game briefly, right? And of course, as we go into the season, when we're previewing each game, then we'll talk a lot more detail. But we'll talk very briefly in this season preview, predict each game, and predict really the entire overall season. Then the week of August 24th, that's our first traditional episode, and that will be our preview of week one, right? Because August 28th, I believe, that is our opening game at JJ Pierce. Then the following week, which would be the week of August 31st, and I have in my notes August 31st ish, because I am traveling that weekend, including that Monday and Tuesday of that week. So I'm not sure exactly when I'm going to record, but I'm still going to try to shoot as much as possible to release the episode Monday night. But that will be our first very standard episode of the show, which is first half recap the Pierce game. Then the second half, we will preview the game at Lake Highlands. Also, one other thing that we do is when the program publishes their full 2026 varsity roster, we will have an episode or potentially a portion of an episode that breaks down the entire roster. We will talk about, at least mention, at least if not discuss, every single name on the 2026 varsity roster and talk about strengths and weaknesses by position. In terms of videos, right now we're saying we've got the YouTube channel. Once again, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at Wylie Football Weekly, or just go to wileyfootballweekly.com, click that subscribe button. Video schedule, there isn't one. That's what I'm just going to come out and say. Videos are going to come generally when I have a chance to film them. Last year we just kind of randomly had some videos and then we threw it out on Facebook. Now I do have one video that is kind of geared for the fan base before the season starts, and I will film that and then I will put that out before the first game. And then my current thought is, as I feel warranted, I may will have like short videos. We're talking, it could be under a minute or under 2 minutes at half times of games and also after games, right? And that's just going to be, hey, these are the quick hit analysis, very quick. I'm not going to be looking at box scores and things like that yet. Just my kind of immediate reactions to a first half of a game or the entire game. And then, of course, then you can listen that following Monday and Tuesday for the full recap of the game. All right, well, now it's time to sort of recap where we are this decade with the Pirates. Now, back when this show started, season one, episode one, 2022, we recapped the program all the way from the point where when I moved back in 2009, right, coming off of the 2008 state title game appearance, all the way up to the present 2022. But in recent years, what we've been doing is we're starting at 2020. And 2020 is a big inflection point for the Wylie Pirate varsity football team. And that is because as soon as the 2019 season ended, Wylie's legendary longtime head coach Bill Howard retired and immediately named his replacement. Like he was given the authority, I guess, to go ahead and without conducting a full interview process, without going and searching out and talking to the hot other 6A, 5A, 4A coaches out there, he immediately was able to name his replacement, which was then his right-hand man, defensive coordinator, Jimmy Carter. And that is who it has been the head coach starting with 2020 all the way to the present. So let's talk about how that kind of started. He was really given a raw deal to start his tenure as head coach because 2020 was the quote unquote COVID season. Now, there's some of you out there, including, hey, my buddy Steve Patterson, he loves to say this, COVID season, throw it out. It doesn't matter. But the way that I see it, it's fair game, right? You had players playing, you had coaches coaching, you actually had real games. Now, yeah, you did have injuries and probably some COVID related illnesses that caused players to be out, but we still played a football season, still got most of the games in. I think there was a couple that got canceled, but we got most of the season in, and I think it's fair game. Unfortunately, Wylie was without its quarterback for the first few weeks, and especially that first week. The very first game in the Coach Carter era was at Plano West. didn't have a quarterback at all. They had to play their sophomore wide receiver Cam Pruitt at quarterback, and that went just as bad as you thought it would, as you thought it would. 28 to nothing. They were shut out. Then the next week they played Louisville. They got blown out. Played at South Garland. They lost. South Garland, they lost their minds because they had finally beat Wiley. And Wiley lost at Lakeview. They lost to Naaman Forest. They're 0-5. And because of a weird quirk that season, the coaching staffs of all the teams in the district decided that week, November 13th, whoever wins those games goes to the playoffs, and whoever doesn't goes home. And Rowlett, they had come in undefeated. Wiley came in without a win. Wiley pulled off an amazing quote unquote upset, but I really think it wasn't an upset. Just everybody was finally fully healthy. Wiley won 30 to 27. That sent him to the playoffs. Wiley only won 3 games that year. They beat Rowlett, they beat Garland, they beat Saxe. That was it. They had a couple games canceled, but it was a 3-win season. And then they went to the playoffs and played Rockwall at Rockwall. And the only highlight of that game was the very opening play because Wiley opened the game with an onside kick, ballsy move, and they recovered it. Unfortunately, they weren't able to score. I believe they ended up punting the ball away. And they lost that game 47 to 7. And yeah, that season just ended with 3 wins, and it was very disappointing. 2021, this was supposed to be a pretty good year, and that's because of a couple of things. One, it's not a COVID year. Two, they had a high profile transfer quarterback from the state of California, Isaac Fay, and they really thought like, okay, and he's a senior and thought he's the real deal, and we're gonna have this amazing season. And unfortunately, in the very first game against Plano West, first quarter of the game, the starting running back gets hurt out for the season. That actually happened again the following season. There's 2 consecutive years where the starting running back was knocked out in the first half of the first game. Wiley had a big lead on Plano West, and they blew it in the big time in the second half. Ended up losing 49 to 32. And things really didn't recover from there. They lost to Keller Central. They lost to Plano East. They lost to an undefeated Garland, undefeated in the regular season, Garland team 48 to nothing. They did rattle off the wins that you expect. They beat South Garland, shut them out 63 to nothing. Beat Rowlett, beat Lakeview. That was it. That's all they could put together. They needed to beat North Garland in the final game to make the playoffs. They did not. They lost 30 to 14. And once again, you had your second consecutive season of 3 wins. Then you come to the 2022 season, season 1 of this show. And it was really, from my perspective, this was Coach Carter on the hot seat. After coming off those 2 3-win seasons, what are you going to do now? Right. And this 2022 team was marked by an amazing defense. Absolutely amazing defense. Started with the opening game playing JJ Pierce, beat them 24 to 7, which was really nice because had been a long time since Wiley had won its opening game. And as you notice, you'll even hear here, Wiley doesn't historically do well in non-district games. They just don't. They schedule them tough, but then they also don't do well. They lost a tough game at Hebron. Then they started beating pretty much everyone you think they would. They beat South Garland. They beat North Garland. They beat Rowlett. Blew out Naaman Forest. They beat Saxe in a very, very tough game. They beat Garland. They lost a tough one to Lakeview Centennial. And then the big stinker, not stinker, but the big bummer was the Wylie East. First game they had played against Wylie East since the 2015 season because the schools did not schedule each other from 2016 to 2021. And Wiley gave up the game-winning touchdown with 37 seconds left in the game. And they lost 26 to 19. Very, very tough game. I mean, it was quite the battle. Felt like a playoff game. And frankly, that was really the difference between Wiley winning a district title and not. And Wiley went to the playoffs. They played a neutral site game against Mesquite Horn, and in a very, very tough defensive battle, again, with this amazing defense that Wiley had that year, they beat Mesquite Horn 21-11. And then the next week they went on to play Duncanville, and Duncanville is Duncanville. They lost 41 to nothing to Duncanville at the end of the season, but they did end the season with a bi-district championship. Cannot complain about that. 2023, I think there was a lot of hope here that the program would build off of especially the defensive success in the 2022 season, but unfortunately it got off to a rocky start, opened at JJ Pierce, and gave up 35 points to JJ Pierce, and Wiley only scored 32. Unfortunately, the game came down to like missing an extra point and then missing a 2-point conversion to try to make up for the missed extra point. But the real story was the defense was not the same. It did not bring it as it did in 2022. Now they won an amazing game against Hebron the next week to give them one of their probably the biggest non-district victory under Coach Carter. This was a game they had to come back from. They were really kind of blown out essentially in the first half, but they scored the winning touchdown with under a minute to go, and I lost my voice. It was a great game, and what was really amazing was the coaching staff made an adjustment. They made a halftime adjustment. Hebron was not able to stop Wiley when Wiley went out with five wide receiver sets. The empty set, nobody in the backfield other than the quarterback, five wide receivers. Let Jagger Bale, the quarterback, find the open guy, and Hebron could just really, they never adjusted to that. Never adjusted to that. And no matter what I have to say about the coaching staff, that's one of the few times that they really impressed me, because it came out later that the offensive coordinator went to Coach Carter and said, hey, let's try this, and Coach Carter said, yeah, let's do it. And it really turned the tide. And again, won on the last second, and it was amazing. And then Wiley then went on a roll, right? That was the start of a 5-game win streak, beating South Garland, beating North Garland, beating Lakeview, beating Rowlett. And that brought us to the big game against Wiley East. And, Wiley came in with a lot of momentum, and Wiley East just punched him in the mouth big time. This game final was like 66-10. Wiley was absolutely embarrassed, and Wiley East. I mean, I said after that game, I really felt like they ran up the score, and also there was this whole situation where they did a fake punt with under a minute left in the game when they're up by 56, and just take a knee. I mean, come on. But that loss really sent Wiley on a spiral. They only in their last 5 games they only won one game, which was a tight one against Naaman Forest. And even the fact that it was tight, it's just this team just never recovered from getting the crap kicked out of them by Wiley East. Nevertheless, because they still rattled off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 district wins, they still qualified for the playoffs, went at Rockwall, and they got spanked again. So another season that just didn't go great, and then ends in a kind of a humiliation at Rockwall. 2024 season, right? This is the season where there was a couple of things converging. One was the end of the Jagger Bale, Martavian Sanders era. They were both third-year seniors. And then the incoming super sophomores, quarterback J.B. Blake, running back Dalen Gordon, cornerback Chase Grandy. And, those of you who remember the show, I was really excited. Really. I think the episode was called, for the premiere, I Can't Wait to Tell You about the most exciting sophomores in Pirate history, something like that. And, it's hard not to be excited when you have an influx of talent and you're also combining it with the veteran leadership and veteran talent, really. And The season it got off to a rocky start. It got up in this game again, opened against JJ Pierce. For some reason, this coaching staff wants to keep scheduling Pierce. I don't know why. I think it's a mistake because not because of talent level, but because the coaching staffs know each other so well that it doesn't really feel like a non-district game. It feels like a district game, right? And it's non-district. So when you're in non-district, the game should feel like non-district. You should be playing non-district opponents, not an opponent that knows you very well. And the thing about that Pierce game in 2024 is it's probably the greatest Wylie Pirate game that ended in a loss ever, ever. Because Wylie, like the last few years, they started out slow in that first half. Third quarter, they get to a point where they're down 41 to 14. Third quarter. And then you blink your eyes, and it's late in the fourth quarter. Wiley leads 42 to 41. You're like, oh my God, they really did come back. They were able to shut down Pierce's offense for the second half and really thought, okay, well, this is it. But when Pierce's possession after they went down 42 to 41, they were able to quickly move the ball down the field, score the game-winning touchdown, and they won 49 to 42. Their quarterback, Presley Harper, he was the Dallas Morning News Offensive Player of the Week because he threw 7 touchdown passes. And that's not good. But it was an exciting game. It was the like his debut game of Dalen Gordon, our 4-star recruit, and I think he had 290 yards from scrimmage. Absolute breakout game, and should have had a better result, but it was still a fun game. The next week went at Flower Mound, and nothing really worked from the get go. They got shut out 38 to nothing. Then they played North Garland, blew them out. Then the big game at Saxe, they lost 44 to 17. It was a frustrating game. That was a game that a lot of the players, a lot of the parents, they thought like could have had this one, could have had this one. This was one where we started hearing some complaints towards the coaching staff. Well, this team responded from that loss with a series of victories. I thought the coaching staff bounced back, beating South Garland, Naaman Forest in a very close game, shut out Rowlett, blew out Garland, blew out Lakeview, and then we had the final game of the season against Wylie East, right? And here's the thing about that game is that game was the regular season finale, and the teams really didn't have a lot to play for. Wylie East, they're both in the playoffs and can't really change their positions. And the game was rescheduled from Friday to Thursday because of weather. And what that meant was that you had coaches from 10-6A, notably the Forney, you had coaches from Forney and North Forney in attendance watching this game. And why that's important is because Forney and North Forney were very likely opponents for Wylie and Wylie East in the playoffs. And if you were to go back and watch that game, Wylie versus Wylie East, 2024 Civil War game, it very much looks like both teams were pulling punches. It looks like it, especially Wylie. Wylie's offense, all of a sudden, they weren't doing anything. They weren't trying anything creative. Any of the creative improvements we had seen earlier in the season, that was all gone. It was a very conservative, just hand off the ball 50 times kind of game. And it just reeked of we don't want to tip our hand for our playoff game next week. Wiley lost that game 23 to 6. I'm convinced that at least the score may have been different, not necessarily the outcome, if both teams really had something to play for. And also, going back the next week against North Forney, the way Wiley came out in that first half of that playoff game, they were a lot more aggressive than they were against Wiley East. It was noticeable, palpable. And it paid off, right? They actually went toe to toe with North Forney in that first half, trading touchdowns. I'm sure it scared the bejesus out of the North Forney coaching staff. Unfortunately, there were a couple of miscues and even honestly a bad call on a fourth down, on a 4th and 1 for North Forney. where their quarterback Legend Bay picked it up on the ground, but looked like the refs gave him a very favorable spot. Ultimately, they were down by I think 14 at the half, and then North Forney just kept doing what it does with their running game, especially with their running quarterback, and they blew out Wylie in the second half, and the season ended there. But this was a pretty good season, 2024. Could it have been better? Yeah, I mean, again, that game they could have won that game against Pierce. Yeah, Saxe felt like a winnable game, but ultimately, it's kind of right where I think they belong. And then last year, and if you followed along last year, you know the deal. But last year was a really disappointing year. Probably the most disappointing for me as a Wiley Pirate fan because I my season preview, I said I have them at 10-0 and I defended it, explained it, why I think seriously this team should be 10-0, and I will die on the hill that the 2025 Wiley Pirate varsity football team should have been 10-0 or at least 9-1. They really should have. They opened at Pierce, struggled in the first half, made a comeback. They did score the apparent game-winning touchdown, and video evidence shows they did. A referee called Dalen Gordon out of bounds. One of the most atrocious calls I've ever seen. But you can't blame the game on that. You got to blame the game on that first half when the offense was anemic. Then the next week, Flower Mound, they lost 34-14, but they were mounting the comeback. And just before the game got called, completely called, the starting quarterback for Flower Mound was knocked out of the game. And I truly believe that he would not have returned for the rest of that game. And I truly believe Wiley would have completed the comeback then and won the game. But unfortunately, it was called and they allowed I think they agreed that it's going to count as a loss. So it did count as a loss. Then they went into the season. And I think we got the first evidence that this wasn't going to be the season that I had predicted when they beat North Garland 38-35. The fact that they allowed 35 to North Garland kind of tells you that okay, well, maybe this really isn't the 10-0 or 9-1 team that I feel like it should, but I still think they should have pulled out. I still think that all those wins could have been there. But yeah, this they pulled out the win. It was nice that they did that, but it wasn't confidence inspiring. The next week against Saxe, that was confidence inspiring. They won 34-27. All of Saxe's 27 points were off of turnovers. So that was bad. It's bad to have turnovers. I think they had 4 or 5 turnovers. They all turned, I think it's four actually, because they all turned into touchdowns with one missed extra point. But this was a big statement win for Wiley. It should have been an even bigger statement win uh, because they shouldn't have had really any points. Maybe without those turnovers, they end up with 3 or 10. But any drive that didn't start on a turnover, Saxe was held scoreless throughout the entire game and really thought, okay, well, that's going to propel them in the stratosphere. They beat South Garland, which again is not really saying anything. And then they went on this weird stretch. They played Naaman Forest, Rowlett, and Garland. All of these were very winnable games, and they lost them. First, they played Naaman Forest. They lost 38-24. Very winnable game. Of course, you shouldn't allow 38 points, but it was a winnable game, and I think the defense could have played better, and certainly the offense just wasn't consistent. Rowlett, same thing. I'm fine with the defense. They allowed 17 points. That's good enough for me. I don't care who you play in Texas 6A. You allow 17 points. You're doing good in my book, and you should win the game. But the offense really sputtered, and they tried to hold on to win a game very narrowly, but they gave up the game-winning touchdown in the final minute of play, lost 17-14. JB Blake, the quarterback, he got hurt at the very end of that Rowlett game, and he was not available for the Garland game. And this is really the big game of the 2025 season that you got to put on the coaching staff because they made a decision. They decided we're not going to start our backup quarterback, Mason Greiner, 6'4" with an arm. We're not going to start him. In fact, he is never going to play except for like mop up against South Garland. We're not going to start him. Instead, we're going to put Dalen Gordon back at quarterback when he hadn't played quarterback since junior high. And I said back then, I'll say it again, that's a mistake because Dalen Gordon, he's a threat when he's playing running back. He's a threat when he plays wide receiver. You know, he didn't line up at all at wide receiver in this game against Garland. And he hasn't played quarterback for a few years. So he made some mistakes that you don't want your starting quarterback to make. It happens, right? But the biggest thing is that Garland, they knew that they're going to run most of the time. He's just going to direct snap, and run. And they were able to shut that down well enough, while they still put up 27 points, right? But because of the weirdness in the offense, they gave up too many possessions to Garland. Garland was able to put 35 points up. Then Wylie lost 35-27. And it looked like all hope was lost, but the penultimate game of the season at Lakeview, they won 49-28. Now, that game was a little weird because Lakeview's quarterback, Dakari Jernigan, was injured. He had missed the last couple games. He did not start this game, but he was able to still play. Came in some second half and did well. But if he could do that, why wouldn't you start him? And they needed him. It was a must-win game for any playoff hopes. But the real story is that the Wylie offense dropped 49 on a team that has multiple people that are high FBS players. And so it was very impressive. Probably one of the best, again, one of the best coaching staff performances from this team, and really all the players together. They needed to win this game to keep their playoff hopes alive, and they did. And that brought us to the Civil War game against Wylie East. Game they lost 36-28. A game where, the first half they only had 13 yards of offense. And second half, they were able to make a comeback, mount that comeback, but they couldn't complete it. We'll talk a little bit more after we finish this. But the season ended right then and there, and the team that should have gone 9-0, or I'm sorry, 10-0 or 9-1, finished the season 4-6, with that being 4-4 in district. So where does that leave us? We've got 6 seasons in the Coach Carter era. I believe his record is 30-33. I mean, 1 playoff victory, no district championships. I mean, not good enough. Not good enough, right? And here's the thing, right? What we've learned in this Coach Carter era. Me personally, I've got no qualms with the defensive coordinator and other lower level coaches. Although we mentioned earlier in the summer, losing Coach Jared Wyatt over to Wylie East, that's a blow. That is a blow. And the OC, Coach Doty, we've talked about him a lot over the years. He's inconsistent. Sometimes he's great, and we just talked about some of the stuff where he was awesome and on point. And other times, not as much. And as I mentioned earlier, we've received a number of complaints from fans, especially last season. But those complaints didn't go anywhere. So it's on the OC to check himself and be better. Leave your ego at the door. Who cares? Who cares? Yeah, people are criticizing you. Deal with it. Everyone gets criticized. I get criticized. My boss criticizes me. My parents criticize me. My wife criticizes me. Get over it. You know what you do? You learn from it and you do better. That's it. It's so simple. Finally, if Coach Carter, right? This is what we're talking about. Coach Carter era. Coach Carter is the nicest guy in the world. I don't think he's a big fan of me and the show, but he's the nicest guy in the world. But he's a defensive head coach. Personally, I prefer offensive head coaches because they know when to be aggressive. Coach Carter's biggest knock is that he coaches conservatively to a fault. And you have to look no further than last year's Civil War game, a win or go home game for the Pirates. As we mentioned earlier, only 13 yards of offense in the first half. But there's more to that story. They punted in the first half on every single 4th and short. Coach Carter was booed off the field by the fans at the end of the first half. Then, the team makes this comeback, and with 3 minutes left, and there's a fourth down. They're down one score. Coach Carter chooses to punt the season away. And of course, you know what he's thinking. You know how defensive coaches work. They think, well, I trust my defense. I trust my defense to go get a stop. Come on. Come on. Come on. You need points. For all intents and purposes, for the most part, it's your offense that's scoring points. You need your offense to score points. You took the ball out of their hands and punted the season away. And really, at least the last point here about the whole Coach Carter era is that there's no pressure on the coaching staff because their jobs are safe. Wylie East, their staff has changed over the years. That's how they got Marcus Gold, and now everything's great for them. But for Wylie High, because of the politics, because Coach Carter replaced Coach Howard, who's now on the school board, I mean, there's no accountability. So it behooves fans and the media and the super fans to put pressure on the coaching staff to be better. What we said for Coach Doty, that applies to Coach Carter too. Be better, and we talked about it at the end of last year with the Johnny Visuals videos on YouTube. When you watch that, you can see how good of a motivator Coach Carter can be. There are times during the season watching those videos, I got chills from Coach Carter. Chills, absolute chills. Like the epitome of sports drama, feeling good. You're like, yeah, I'm going to go to war for this guy. Absolutely. But the problem is you need more than that, right? That's a motivational speaker. That's a motivational coach. You need strategy too, and you need in-game strategy. I don't necessarily think, for the most part, that the coaching staff struggles with game planning and preparation during the week. It's really in-game, right? In-game. And like we've said in years past, there's been a few times where we've seen some amazing in-game coaching. And other times we see too conservative. We see playing not to lose. We see taking the ball out of the offense's hands when they need to score. And for these reasons, the last two seasons, I came into this season premiere with unbridled enthusiasm. Just like, oh my God, you guys, Pirates are going to be amazing, amazing, amazing. I can't wait for you guys to see the team. Honestly, last year kind of broke me a little bit. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not a super fan. I'm not super into it. I'm diehard. I'm ride or die, for Pirates. And I can't wait for this season. And I have faith in the players. I really do. But, for this season, I'm coming in with guarded optimism. I really am. I'm trying to be a little cautious. I just don't want to get everybody's hopes up and then we see a repeat of last year, right? And that leads me to the question of the season, and I'm toying with whether or not this should be in the title of the episode. And I think it should be. I really think it should be. And maybe it's a little controversial when you see the title, but bear with me. Last year, the question was for the 2025 season, is this the best Pirate team since the 2008 state finalist? I think the answer ultimately was no. I think maybe 2019 and 2022 were really those squads. At least especially in the 6A era. I don't really want to talk about the previous eras. It's a whole different ball game. It's apples and oranges. But they really shot themselves in the foot for various reasons that we've already talked about. For this season, the thing I want you to think of as you're watching game after game of the 2026 Pirates varsity football season is, will the 2026 varsity Pirates overcome the coaching staff? Okay? Now, I want to explain what that means. That's not as negative as it sounds. I know it sounds pretty negative, and there is a negative tint to it, but it's not as negative as it sounds. This is what I mean. If you take a team and your team consists of all 5-star recruits on both sides of the ball, right? 5-star everywhere. and you give them any coaching staff on the planet, they're still going to do really well. They're still going to win virtually every game. They're still going to be state title contenders, national championship contenders, right? And if you want to apply it to the Pirates coaching staff, the example I have is if you went into the 2026 season and now the Duncanville football team, their coaching staff was the Pirates coaching staff. All right. So Coach Carter's the head coach and Doty's the OC, Shields DC, and so forth. That team is still odds-on favorite to win the state championship in 6A Division 1. That team is still a very high national championship contender, right? Because the reason is regardless of any inconsistencies from the OC, regardless of how conservative Coach Carter might be in his in-game coaching, you're going to run simple plays, and these five-star athletes are going to take it to the house on offense. And on defense, they can run base formations, and they can still get sacks, tackles for loss, interceptions, forced fumbles. They can do all that. Right? So the Duncanville can win in spite of the coaching staff, right? And then on the flip side, you can take the 2026 Pirate varsity coaching staff and you can put them with a very bad team in, say, Paris, Texas. And if you've been listening this summer, you know why I'm referencing Paris, Texas. A little deep cut reference. Go back and listen to the bonus episodes. You'll see what I'm talking about. It's actually not a reference to the Wylie Pirates, but another program. But if you took the Pirate coaching staff and put them on an absolute terrible team, where no one's even going to go to a D3 or NAIA school, they're probably going to go 0-10, regardless of how good the coaching staff is, right? So so to explain what I mean by overcome the coaching staff, what I mean is will this group of players, where you've got Blake, right, who is an athletic freak at quarterback, he's going to be an FBS DB. You've got a four-star running back in Dalen Gordon. You've got someone who's probably going to get a lot of good offers from the O-line in Teslim Busari. On the defensive side, you've got Chase Grandy, FCS offeree, probably going to be FBS offeree by the time that the season ends. You got Dalen Gordon's little brother, Donnie Skinner, first team all district as a sophomore at safety. Now he's playing junior. Now it's his junior year. You add that all up, and maybe it doesn't matter how conservative Coach Carter is. If those guys are able to just ball, right? Those guys just dominate the competition, then it doesn't matter, right? If those guys run up the score every game, right? To where, even simple handoffs turn into touchdowns and they're beating everybody by 30, 40 points, then, the fact that Coach Carter sometimes gets punt happy, it means nothing. It means nothing. So that's the question, right? Because you worry about a conservative head coach and potentially inconsistent OC when you have these tight games, right? When you have these tight games. So that is why the question of the season is, will the 2026 Varsity Pirates overcome the coaching staff? And perhaps that could be worded better, right? Maybe it's, will the 2026 Varsity Pirates do well in spite of the coaching staff? All right. Or just because of their own athleticism. That's something I want you to think of, especially in this very interesting non-district schedule. We're not going to do season preview here today. We're already running pretty long, but you have a very interesting 3-game slate. Now we're back to 3 non-district games. You've got this Pierce team where the coaching staffs know themselves inside and out, so it feels like a district game. But I'm just going to tell you right now, I feel like Wylie's got a lot more talent than Pierce does now. In the last 2 years, Pierce has graduated a lot of their really good talent that feasted on Wylie. And Wylie's now at that thing there, and where they've got all this high-end talent that are seniors. That seems to tip its favor in for Wylie, right? And then I'm going to skip to week 3. Mesquite Horn, they've got talent. They've definitely got talent on both sides of the ball, but they've got their fourth coach in 6 years. It's kind of a mess. So there's a chance for a Wiley team with a lot of guys that are returning, high-end guys, and the same coaching staff that's been there for several years to potentially run all over Mesquite Horn, right? But then maybe Lake Highlands is the best test for this question because they're really good. I think they're coming off a nine win season last year. They're really good. They're going to be good this year. It's going to be at their place. And if it's a tight game, then some of these tendencies like being conservative in your play calls or conservative in your strategic decisions in game, those things can bubble up, and they can have absolutely have a big factor in the end result of the game. I think that's going to wrap up our season premiere. Once again, I really want to emphasize that we now have a YouTube channel. All of our podcasts are going to automatically end up on the YouTube channel once I upload them to our podcast platform. And then the videos that we create are going to also be on that YouTube channel. Please, please, I'm begging all of you, if you're listening to this show and you're interested in this, to subscribe to that YouTube channel. Just click that subscribe button. Then that way, at least I know, because it helps me understand how many people are actually listening and paying attention and, want to engage in this discourse. I mentioned before the Zazzle store. Check that out. I've got the link in the show notes. If you're curious, if you're at all curious, please get that shirt. I'd really appreciate it. And like we said, next week we've already got a scrimmage. All right. By the time you're listening to this, the Pirates already started practicing for this 2026 season, and next week's episode will be the first scrimmage, and that's going to be a very, very interesting one, right? It's going to be a home scrimmage against Princeton. I don't even know when Wiley has, if and when they have played Princeton, in athletics and certainly in football at least. And I think that's a very interesting scrimmage to open up with, get our first look of the Pirates, and that's going to be at home too. So you can definitely go out to that. And historically, that's free. So I expect that to be free. Hopefully, we'll have more information on that next week. And then, as I mentioned, 2 weeks from now, we will have the season preview. Look for that. That's gonna be really fun and really get to talk about all the opponents and what this season might potentially look like. So there you have it, folks. This has been the season 5 premiere of Wylie Football Weekly, the only podcast dedicated to your Wylie Pirates varsity football team. I am your host, the one and only Wylie superfan Pappy. Thank you for joining. AHMO, baby. AHMO.